I'm Kate Moody, Strategy Director at UNICEF, and this is Fintech Insider News. This week, we are talking about Revolut getting their banking license in Mexico. The new license means they can offer more products and services in the country and plan to launch a remittance service later this year. However, they face stiff competition from Nubank, who've also set their sights on growth in Mexico. Announced at the recent Innovate Finance Global Summit, Project Nemo is a new campaign to tackle disability inclusion in fintech. The 12-month initiative will include a programme of events all designed to help fintechs make positive changes to make their office, products and services more inclusive of disabilities. We're joined by Project Nemo's lead, Joanne Dewar, who tells us all about it on the show. And one woman in Brazil is currently awaiting trial for attempted theft through fraud. But what death-defying tactic did she allegedly use to try and get a $3,000 bank loan? We discuss all of this and much more on today's show, so don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome to episode 847 of Fintech Insider. I'm Kate Moody, Strategy Director at UNICEF. I'm joined this week on Fintech Insider News by three fantastic guests who are here to break down the biggest stories from the past week in fintech and financial services. Firstly, I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host, Nadine Timmer-Bodenstein, Ventures Product Lead at UNICEF. Welcome, Nadine. I don't think we've done a show. Have we done a show before? I'm not sure. This is what an exciting first for us, at least. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. And like you said, very excited to do my first show with you. And it's been a few weeks since I've been on here. So delighted to be back.
Awesome. We're also very happy to welcome to the show Sophie Vo from This Week in Fintech. Thank you so much for joining us, Sophie. What should our listeners know about you and what you do?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you guys for having me. So I lead premium content at This Week in Fintech. We are a newsletter with over 100,000 global readers. We also have events around the world on pretty much a weekly basis. And I'd be remiss in not plugging that we also have a couple podcasts, which listeners should obviously supplement their podcast diet with as well.
A varied podcast diet is absolutely to be recommended. But yeah, thanks for joining us and looking forward to picking your brains as we go through the news. And finally, another big Fintech Insider hello to Joanne Dewar, now the lead at Project Nemo. Welcome back to the show, Joanne. Always a pleasure to have you on. We're going to talk about Project Nemo shortly, but again, what should our listeners know about who you are and what you do?
So great to be here. I feel I need to look up which previous episodes I've been on. I didn't realise it's got as much as 847 now. But yeah, great to be back. I've been at the coalface of fintech for a decade now, formerly as CEO of GPS. Exited there 18 months ago, and now I'm working more generally to figure out how to help fintech as an industry be the best that it can be.
Well, I can 100% get behind that ambition. So yeah, welcome to the show and looking forward to hearing your take on things as we go through as well. So let's jump into our first story from this week. It's been covered in multiple places, but we've taken our version of it from Reuters. And that is Revolut receives Mexican banking license. The UK fintech, which already boasts 40 million customers worldwide, has approval from Mexico's National Banking and Securities Commission as it looks to expand across LATAM. Mexico is currently the second biggest economy in Latin America. Following a third-party audit, Revolut will begin rolling out a number of new products and services in the country, including cross-border remittances, which reached a record $63.3 billion in Mexico last year. Schroeder, one of Revolut's investors, now believes the fintech is 45% more valuable than it was a year ago. And Revolut's news comes as Nubank also await their banking license, having applied late last year. Sophie, obviously you're based in the US. It seems slightly closer to Mexico than me sat here in my house in the UK. So I'll come to you first. What are your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, so first off, big kudos to the Revolut team. Getting a banking license in any jurisdiction is a pretty character building experience, as a lot of you will know. So Revolut famously is still awaiting its license in the UK, which I think speaks to just how momentous this kind of event is. But in Latin America specifically, I think fintechs still have a lot of wood to chop as a population that's still 70% unbanked. In Mexico, about 50% of the population is still unbanked, and there's still a pretty heavy reliance on cash, but mobile payments, wallets are quickly getting adoption. So I think these stories and the proliferation of fintech in LATAM more broadly really speak to three big drivers. So first off, licensing in terms of regulation. Governments have been really adaptive two fintech models. And as mentioned, Nubank is still waiting to be approved for a banking license in Mexico. Nubank operates in Mexico today under a SOFIPO, so a popular banking license, which allows them to offer basic services to low-income individuals and small businesses. But the advantage of having a banking license for Nu and Revolut is to add additional capabilities, so higher deposit limits on deposit products, investment products, more complex forms of loans, and even national ATMs and branch networks. So I think the nice thing for fintechs is that in LATAM, there's a lot of these narrower licenses that allow them to get to market a lot faster. So first driver licensing, second driver is tech infrastructure. So governments have also been really thoughtful about driving competition in fintech through open banking, instant payments. So there's a really mature ecosystem of fintech infrastructure providers building banking as a service, lending as a service, payments on top of those rails. Again, letting fintechs get to market much faster. So licensing, tech infrastructure, I think the third big driver is just the demographic of this region. So obviously a lot of these countries are Spanish speaking. They tend to skew towards young, very digitally savvy consumers. And I think the workforce really reflects that as well. So there's an ever stronger pool of talent with really deep expertise in fintech and finance related fields that's just going to carry all this progress forward.
Absolutely. Awesome summary. Thank you so much. Nadine, what about this news was most interesting to you?
Yeah, I think it further confirms just that Revolut is continuing to disrupt the market with what it's trying to do. You know, I mean, the fact that it's aggressively going after international expansion in a number of different current countries. I'm sure people are sitting back thinking, okay, well, Mexico now, where next? Perhaps they're going to try and enter into a number of other different markets in Latin America after that. I think it's testament to the fact that they are consistently taking that customer-centric approach as well. You know, the article mentions how the first product that they're going to bring to market in Mexico is that cross-border remittance ability because of the, like Sophie touched on, the kind of customer base there. I think also the fact that a lot of individuals in Mexico perhaps go to the US to work. They're looking for a way to send money back to loved ones at home. So the fact that Revolut is using that as its starting point and then surely going to expand into different products and services over time also, I guess, highlights their kind of very much product-focused approach. So I think it's following on from Sophie summarizing her 3 points, I think my 3 points are actually the kind of continued focus on that international expansion, continuing to take that customer-centric approach and taking that, building gradually over time up with different products that are going to serve customers in the best way possible. So it's interesting. It's exciting.
Yeah, I don't think I can express mine as concise as like 3 bullet points, so kudos to you both. But I mean, I suppose the thing that I find really interesting about this story is it feels like the main conversation seems to be about Revolut now competing with Nubank. Like Nubank are also really heavily investing in Mexico, making really aggressive moves. And it feels like this is kind of almost a reflection of where we're at in terms of the rise of fintech globally, that it's not just a big player comes into a market for the first time and it's the only conversation is about how will the big banks react. It's a big player enters a market for the new time and another big fintech is already there or trying to enter at the same time, and who's going to win. So it feels like a really interesting market to be watching unfold. I think we've also seen some announcements from the likes of, Santander that they're planning to kind of launch a new digital bank. And you do wonder for some of these incumbents if by the time they're likely to have actually got something to market, the ship may have already sailed. But I don't know.
And just to build on that, because I know that we're speaking about, Revolut and Nubank and kind of some of the big global players, but I think it's also important to focus on, and Sophie briefly touched on it, there is a massively booming fintech scene of smaller players as well in Mexico and adjacent Latin American countries. And we know that Nubank has recently partnered with one such company called Felix. And I think it would be remiss to not also champion some of the kind of local companies and what they're doing. And Felix they were founded with the mission to simplify cross-border payments. They created a chat-based platform that essentially helps Latin Americans in the US to send money back to loved ones, family members in Mexico. And they've, really heavily focused on technology such as blockchain and machine learning to enable this solution in a better way and actually integrate directly into WhatsApp. So I think I just wanted to highlight Felix and the work that they've done, which has obviously also spurred interest by the likes of Nubank, and is now a strategic partnership that they had to take to be able to serve customers with the services that they need.
Yeah. Joanne, what's caught your eye on this one?
A few things. I mean, firstly, I supported Revolut in getting live in the first 42 markets. So I've been on that journey a little bit with them, including when we got going across Asia Pac. And certainly you can see how, as an organization, they've matured over time and will have really sort of learnt the market and the localization requirements. I think there's as Nadine says, there's some interesting things coming up locally inside Mexico as well, including Clip. I think in Brazil, you've got DOC that used to be Conductor, which was sort of quite like GPS in terms of starting as an issuer processor. And actually, it was the first issuer processor behind Nubank. But actually, they've created their BaaS capability on top. And that's enabling a lot of other challenger-like proposition. So the market's definitely active. I don't think we need to think about it being just Revolut versus Nubank, because they've got sort of nuances in their propositions. I think back to the thing in terms of what's happening in the UK. I think watching the UK CEO, Francesca, on form, on fire at IFGS this week. She's really strong and she's got good EQ. She's able to understand what's being asked and what's being asked behind that. And I think that will be helping Revolut generally in their relationships with the regulators and the government in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like there's not many shows that go past about us touching at least at some point on like Revolut's UK banking license trials and tribulations, right? So I
have no insight. I just thought Francesca was really strong on Monday.
No, absolutely. Sophie, how interesting is it that Schroeder claimed that Revolut's valuation has increased by 45%? Is that something that you set much stock by?
Really interesting. I think all this sort of speaks to a broader trend that has definitely caught my eye, which is consumer banks going into more internationalized products as a mechanism to, or sort of as a wedge into higher income customers. So Revolut has always been very internationally focused. You've been able to use your Revolut card in any jurisdiction with low conversion fees. But Nubank just recently announcing that they were offering global accounts in partnership with Wise, I think is a pretty big testament to how popular these products are becoming with the high income segment. So HSBC also launching Zing as a multi-currency account with travel perks, and I think all of these sort of features speak to the opportunity to capture the high income segment with this more global offering. And this is a trend that we've seen in B2B with AirWallex, FollowPay, GoCardless, all these companies offering global accounts to businesses. And it's interesting to see this become a differentiator in B2C as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of moving away from that kind of model that people necessarily just like want to just be in one market with one bank. Like that whole model has just completely disappeared. Okay, well, I thought we could talk about Revolut for the whole show, but I'm going to move us on to our next story. We'll have to continue watching how things play out for them in Mexico. Our next story we've taken from Payment Expert, and that is Project Nemo launches to create better fintech disability inclusion. Announced at the Innovate Finance Global Summit, Project Nemo is a new initiative urging fintechs to better serve disabled customers in the UK. The 12-month campaign aims to drive long-term systemic change through education, empowering and showcasing people with disabilities. Project Nemo will also launch a toolkit to help fintechs build inclusive workplaces, products, and services. Alongside this, Nemo will lead the Fintech Festival of Inclusion, an events program connecting and empowering fintech business leaders to implement positive change. Project Nemo is being led by Joanne Jewett, who we're obviously very delighted to have us on the show today. Joanne, obviously going to come to you first. Tell us a bit more about this. How did it get started? What's the vision here?
So I'm delighted to be able to share with you that we've launched Project Nemo. It's a pro bono initiative that we've gone public with just this week, but have been working behind the scenes for some time. And the origins of it were, I had always had the opportunity to lead quite progressive D&I strategies, and I'd particularly lent in the latter years on disability inclusion inside my organisation. And then post-exit, I had spoken at a number of events about disability inclusion, sharing the experience. And every time I went and spoke at an event, I had a queue of people coming up to me afterwards and saying, you've got to do something more about this. And then because. And then behind that was a personal story of a family member and a reason why disability inclusion, they feel, is being overlooked, even within the D&I agenda. Everyone's dealing with D&I in the same order, where it's gender first, and then ethnicity, then LGBTQIA+, and then at best, disability inclusion is fourth. And yet at the same time, we're not really looking at the accessibility of all of our products and services. Even though financial inclusion's been a big topic, typically we look at specific inclusive products or services aimed at a particular market segment with particular characteristics. We've not really sufficiently been thinking about actually all of our products and services need to be fully accessible. So the expertise is all out there, the lived experience, the service providers that can teach our industry what we need to do. And so what Project Nemo is about is bringing these two communities that don't have much overlap together into the same room through a series of workshops. So the two communities being the fintech community and the disability community, bringing the expertise into the room, highlighting the success stories, the examples of where things are going well, highlighting a safe space where things aren't so good. And so what we're creating is what we're calling a festival inclusion. It's a series of workshop sessions where we work on specific subtopics of the disability inclusion and accessibility universe. So one may be more product orientated, more might be marketing, website, that side of things. One might be your disability ERGs. One might be focused on the HR and legal aspects. One might be about the language of disability and ableism. And each of those are going to lead to the creation of content that will be like a how-to guide, pointing at the steps to getting started, and the pointing to the service providers and the resources available. And then hopefully maybe a podcast as well, such that by the end of the year, we've created this sort of comprehensive ebook how-to guide of disability inclusion. Now, the disability community is super excited about all of this. They've never seen this attempted at industry level before. And I have been working behind the scenes across what I call the face of the industry, the various event organisers and trade bodies, and I've got all of them supporting this. And then finally, the boost to all of this, hopefully, will be at the end of August, beginning of September. We know now that for 2 weeks, the whole world wakes up to disability inclusion because of the Paralympics. And, everyone suddenly starts looking around for, once every 4 years and say, right, what are the rest of us doing about disability inclusion? And we'll be able to showcase what we're doing in fintech through Project Nemo, and hopefully encourage replication across other industry sectors too.
No, it's an awesome mission. And I assume there's probably a very substantial risk that people underestimate how many customers are directly impacted by this, right? I'm obviously variety of different stats, but I think one that I saw recently said 24% of the British working age population had a disclosed disability. So this isn't a niche. This isn't a tiny slither of the population. This is about trying to better serve a substantial proportion of the UK that are currently underserved, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, this disability covers a wide range of different, condition situations, including neurodiversity, including those with cancer. I mean, it's a very small percentage of disabilities that are actually sort of wheelchair bound, which is obviously the international symbol. I think it's something like 17% of disabilities are visible. Many are actually invisible. So it's up to the individual whether to share or not. And then it's really important to not focus on the nature of the disability, which is the medical model of disability, and focus on the social model, which is actually it's our environment that we're creating that is disabling people from fulfilling either the activities of making payments or interfacing with financial services products, or as well, being employed and having careers. And this is not just about sort of B2C and the end consumer, because at the end of the day, throughout all of our B2B offerings, at the end of the day, people buy from people. And and how you treat people internally, and how people feel internally in their employee net promoter score reflects directly into how they treat their customers and suppliers, and the NPS from that perspective as well. So these things are all connected.
Absolutely. Sophie, how well do you think fintechs are currently doing to support these kinds of customers from your perspective?
I think there's always more work to be done. Going your stat about disability in the UK, the CDC estimates that 1 in 4 Americans have a disability. And so obviously, along with all the challenges that come with that, there's a unique set of financial challenges as well, ranging from managing government benefits to just basic usage of financial products. So it's great to see the proliferation of things like MasterCard, Visa, enabling users with visual impairments to use cards that have Braille on them. Just really like empathetic features that cater to truly like the full needs of their entire user base. So really encouraging to see.
Nadine, obviously before your time at LemonFest, you worked at a big bank, right? So what does it look like for a big bank to solve some of these challenges versus a fintech, do you think?
It's as if you read my mind, because I was honestly just thinking that in the background. And before I answer your question, not trying to divert attention away from it, Joanne, I was on the Project Nemo website earlier, and I noticed that one of your partners is Rise by Barclays, and I actually previously worked at Barclays. And ahead of this podcast, I was reflecting on my time there and the kind of policies that they had in place and the work that they did. And I mean, I was there for a period of time, but at least in my opinion, I thought that Barclays was doing quite a good job in terms of trying to better serve customers with disabilities, especially on the side of internal employees. And I also saw on your website that it's obviously not just around how we better serve the external customers, but how we better prepare internal employees with the right tools, content, etc., that they need to perform their job better. And at least when I was an internal employee at Barclays, I felt like that was championed quite well. As Sophie mentioned, in terms of thinking about fintechs, there's always more that can be done. But just from my experience at one of the large retail banks in the UK, I thought Barclays were doing quite a good job of it. I don't know if you agree with that, Joanne, or how you feel about the wider banking landscape as opposed to smaller fintechs.
Yeah, I think this is an area where we've actually, in fintech, we've got quite a lot to learn from the incumbent, the bigger banks. I think they have each, lent in more to recognizing their sort of duty to support the whole of society, and their products and services have sought to cover and reflect that. I think big tech is a brilliant example of where inclusion, both internal and accessibility, has been done particularly well. When you look at examples like Google, like Microsoft, like Apple. And I think, Sophie, to draw comparisons with the US, actually the US is quite far ahead, is much more protective of the disabled consumer than in the UK. The ADA does go further. For in the UK, a number of the sort of the enforcement of things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines it's only enforced at public sector level, not at for the private sector. And equally, there's something else coming into force next year. There's a European Accessibility Act, but again, that's Europe and not UK. So right now, we don't have the sort of the legal sort of mandate for some of this stuff. And really, we shouldn't need it. We should be able to raise the bar ourselves as an industry as to what makes our products and services and communications more fully accessible. And a number of the changes that we need to make are really very minor. It's not about adding lots of effort and cost to the product roadmap. There's a lot that can be done in terms of short, sharp course correction in just things like the websites not having titles in block capitals because that gets read as an acronym, or when you're putting a hashtag, use camel case, which is capitalize the first letters, or when we're speaking at conferences and you're on a panel, you have a screen directly behind you, so leverage the fact that closed captioning is coming on so well so that we can have it running alongside. So. And a lot of these things are not about a specific disability, because having the live captioning isn't just about those that have hearing impairments. Actually, those with ADHD and other conditions, it helps them to focus and to concentrate on what's being said. So, that's where I'm sort of holding the mirror up to the industry to say, I think we can all do better. Actually, there are some organizations doing great things, but, just haven't come forward and been speaking about it. I think it's in case they feel that they've not got far enough. But we can all be on a journey, and we can, we can all help this industry be better than it is today. And I'm going to help show the steps of how we can do it.
Well, I don't think there's a better place for us to wrap on that. I mean, massive kudos to you and the team for your work you've done today on kind of getting this live. And yeah, we're super excited to kind of see the impact that you have over the coming months. So watch this space. On that note, we're just going to take a quick pause here. We'll be back very shortly. Welcome back. Before we get into the second half of the news, a note to go check our most recent Fintech Insider Insights show. Rachel Panjian is joined by some great guests from Zero Fintech and Project Everyone to discuss the current state of ESG in financial services. As banks and other FS providers invest more and more in ESG programs, they discuss what our industry has actually done, what it continues to do as ESG becomes more and more important to customers. Plus, they discuss the role financial services can play on a global stage to help achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So go check that out in our podcast feed. It's the one just below this. Right, now let's get back into the news. Our next story comes from FF News, and that is Ozone API and Thistle initiatives to help banks get ahead of PSD3. Open banking leader Ozone and compliance consultancy Thistle have announced a strategic partnership to help banks adapt to PSD3. The exact details of PSD3 are not yet known, but further rules around customer consent and additional guidelines on open banking are expected. However, PSD3 will go beyond PSD2, no surprise, in that it will be regulation with binding legal force as opposed to merely a directive. The two companies will work together to assist banks through the regulatory changes and ensure their full PSD3 compliance. We want to know a bit more about this partnership, and Hugh Davies, CEO and founder of Ozone API, offered a few exclusive words to Fintech Insider.
Hey there! Did you know Baker's always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower than low prices? And when you download the Baker's app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Baker's today. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
We're really excited about our new partnership with Thistle. PSD2 saw the start of the open banking journey in Europe, but we're really only at the end of the beginning. There's still a long way to go. Open banking still doesn't work that well in Europe. Banks have kind of done the minimums to comply, but it's not created the foundations for the true benefits to the industry and society to be unlocked. So we think PSD3 will be a really important next step, increasing the expectations on the quality of APIs that the banks need to deliver, ensuring a better user experience and more control over consent, and creating the foundations for a much more vibrant ecosystem. So we are thrilled to be working with Thistle. This is going to be a real challenge for the banks. And between us, we can bring great regulatory expertise and a technology platform in the Ozone API platform that helps banks keep up to pace, keep up to date with any changes in the regulation, and deliver high-performing, standards-compliant APIs wherever they are in the world.
Well, I think we're all excited for PSD3. I'm sure the banks are especially excited for PSD3. Nadine, what are you most excited about for PSD3?
So, without trying to swerve the question, for me, this article actually, the key point isn't around PSD3. I think it's around the innovation that's now happening with respect to regulation. So, RegTech, for want of a better word. The fact that Thistle have announced this partnership with Ozone shows how much of a pain point regulation is for so many different people, companies, etc., across the ecosystem. And it really resonated with research that I've just been doing on a project that I'm working on, which is specific to the wealth management industry, actually. So not really related to open banking, but adjacent in the fact that the wealth managers that we have been interviewing are still struggling with how they effectively implement the recommendations that came out of Consumer Duty. And I think the stat that was really interesting from our research showed that wealth managers spend around 75% of their time just trying to understand regulation and how that applies to their role and how they are supposed to ensure that they remain compliant and perform their job in the way that now they are now being directed to do so. So I think for me, what's really interesting here is that we are now seeing partnerships like this emerge. We're seeing new players in the market. I mean, just today, actually, Antler, which is a zero-day investor, they announced a £1 million investment into 8 or 9 different British-based fintechs. But one of the fintechs that they haven't invested in is a company called Falco. And it's an AI platform that empowers financial firms to effectively identify and translate regulatory changes into actionable insight. So it's another example of how companies are now emerging to try and help, other players in the industry implement these regulations that are coming through. So that for me really is actually the kind of key interesting insight here. And the other stat that Antler actually shared when they made the announcement about the investment into Falco was that currently compliance teams are spending something crazy like more than 3,000 hours annually just going through these reports, trying to understand the implications of what has been published in the regulation, translate it into insights for the relevant teams to then action. So I think going back to this example here of Ozone API and Thistle, they are trying to achieve a very same goal, which is how do they make it easier for banks, fintechs, those who are going to be impacted by PSD3 and the new regulation it brings, to more effectively implement it. In terms of PSD3 itself, I mean, like the article kind of stated, we don't actually yet know what it's going to mean. So I wait with bated breath to see the changes that comes with that and how that hopefully, like they said, does actually lay the foundation for further improved customer experience, not just with open banking, but I'm sure moving into open finance in the future as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, so as Nadine said, we're still waiting to kind of see the full details of it. I think it's expected to come into force in 2026. But Sophie, what are you expecting to be the main things that fintechs and banks alike will have to think about and really consider in terms of their offerings?
Yeah, Nadine, that is a crazy stat. And I definitely see that anxiety on the other side of the pond as well, talking to small banks who are trying to comply with future regulation around the US's version of open banking rules. So I actually worked at Pod when we were expanding into the UK and Europe, and we were pretty jarred by how many steps ahead the regulation around this was in the UK and Europe compared to the US. In the US, it's always been open banking has been sort of a private-public partnership motion, whereas the government in the UK and Europe seem to be like well in advance of the standards and regulations. The CFPB just released new rules as a potential update to, or a proposed rules as an update to Dodd-Frank Section 1033, which is the rule that establishes consumers' right to data privacy and data access in the US. And these rules would essentially lay out an API spec and security standards for financial institutions whose data would become available to their customers. Hopefully, that wouldn't introduce a lot of uplift for financial institutions. So the standards for security are already laid out in the GLBA safeguards framework. The standard for open banking is already defined by the FDX, and I think the new rules would probably defer to that. In terms of implementation, banks are working with banking cores that are expected to comply already, and data aggregators like Plaid are offering APIs that essentially will allow financial institutions to plug into those existing APIs and then make the data broadly available to other aggregators in line with their requirements under the updated Dodd-Frank 1033 rules. So I think we'll always be sort of 5 steps behind the UK and Europe in terms of open banking, but we're always looking to see what's coming next and where the regulators are going to put the guidance based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 5 steps behind in some ways, but probably 5 steps ahead in others, right? So pros and cons. Joanne, what are you most interested to see play out with PSD3?
So I don't know whether you've already covered on another episode what's coming out of the first of CFIT's open finance coalitions. But I saw a presentation from the team at Fintech North a couple of weeks ago showing what they've created as a proof of concept with the Citizens Advice Bureau as to how they would be able to massively simplify the accessibility of affordability assessments. There's such a I don't have the stats to hand, unfortunately. You must get Ozone or one of the team on to be able to share what they're doing, but it's really, really impressive. Just seeing that real practical use case of what all of this is actually enabling.
Yeah, no, I know we've had Ez on the show fairly recently, and definitely kind of keeping an eye on what he and the team are doing. Well, we're definitely going to have to keep an eye on PSD3 as it becomes more and more clear what it's actually specifically going to focus on. But I think with big regulation change also comes big opportunity for people to hopefully serve customers better, provide greater security, better access. So fingers crossed that all of the inevitable headaches that come with it that Nadine set out will really pay off from the customer's perspective. Okay, I'm going to move us on to our next story. We've taken this story from Pipe, and that is Pipe launches embedded solution to make funding more accessible to millions of SMBs. Pipe, the platform connecting SMBs to capital, has just unveiled its new embedded capital as a service solution. From now on, businesses can access capital via Pipe's platform from directly within the software they're already using, creating a better experience for its merchants. End merchants can then access capital more easily based on their secure transaction data from the partner platform, bypassing many of the hurdles of traditional financing. The embedded solution, which uses live transaction data, will unlock funding opportunities for millions of SMBs. Meanwhile, Pipe's direct offering is still available through their website. But you don't have to take my word for it. We nabbed Pipe CEO Luc Voiles, I probably massacred your name, apologies Luc, for a few words, and here's what he had to say about it.
Hi, I'm Luc Voiles, the CEO of Pipe, and we've just launched Pipe Capital as a Service. So small business owners can get access to capital from within the software they use every single day to run their business. The number one pain point for small businesses is consistently the need for access to capital. They need money to help grow their business. They need money to pay the bills. They need money to make payroll. It's just a consistent problem. The current banking system isn't serving these micro merchants, and Pipe Capital as a Service is here to help solve that problem. So imagine a nail salon owner that's using Boulevard's vertical software to help manage all of the appointments and take payments and just handle the day-to-day operational needs of running a nail salon. When they log into their software, they'll be able to see the Boulevard Capital powered by Pipe offering that will enable these sometimes immigrant and women-owned business leaders to get access to capital for the first time. They may not have a FICO score yet, but that's okay. Our product simply uses the credit card transaction history to allow us to offer capital to these business owners for the first time. So what's next? That's just our first offering to help solve the largest pain point. What's next for Pipe? We're working currently on building our 30-day charge card product with spend management and bill pay. The micro merchant space is underserved right now on the spend management and bill pay side. So that's coming next. After that, we'll be working on an embedded payroll offering, auto savings for tax. A lot of the embedded financial services features that most small business owners need, Pipe will have the full suite of those features. We'll enable software companies like Boulevard that are focused on a narrow vertical to focus on those normal day-to-day pain points. They can focus on helping nail salons run the day-to-day tasks, and they can partner with Pipe to help offer capital, number one, and then charge cards, spend mechanism, spend management, bill pay, and then payroll. These products are highly risky and highly regulated, and Pipe has decades of experience across the entire executive suite to make sure we're doing this the right way. It's not an easy thing to do. So the software companies can focus on solving the day-to-day task and customer pain points, and Pipe can focus on serving capital and the related financial services for these small businesses. It's a win-win situation for both. And fundamentally, it helps us succeed in our mission to empower access to financial services for small businesses in a fair and unbiased way.
Sophie, as our US-based person, I'll come to you first. We've seen lots of solutions focused on trying to open up lending for SMBs, open up capital. How big a deal do you think this solution is versus what's already in the market?
I think it's a really big deal. SMBs account for half of the economic activity in the US. According to the University of Connecticut, small businesses, or 20% of small businesses still fail in their first year in the US. So working capital has been a really big problem for SMBs, especially in economic slowdowns. And I think the greater availability of financing options is really positive for micro businesses and small businesses especially.
Yeah, I mean, Nadine, obviously we spent a lot of time talking about embedded finance more generally and the opportunities of embedded finance. How much of an opportunity do you think embedded capital for businesses within these types of platforms represents?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I shouldn't admit this on a podcast, but it was the first time that I'd seen capital as a service, although I suppose everything is as a service now. So I think it's really interesting. You know, I was doing some research into Pipe and its platform, and I suppose the key takeaways for me by this, you know, this new product that they're offering, the capital kind of embedded in the existing platforms of the merchants. I think number one is around streamlined access to capital. I think the fact that this is actually embedded in the merchant's platform is just going to make it far easier, quicker for them to access capital at the time of need. You know, we have spoken with a number of small businesses as part of our jobs to be done research in the past, and kind of managing cash flow, access to capital always come up as the biggest jobs to be done and the priority unmet needs for them. So I think that's a really key one. And I suppose linked with the streamlined access to capital is probably the point around convenience and efficiency. You know, if you are a small business owner, you've probably got a million different things on your mind, just trying to manage the day-to-day of your business, serve your clients, do this and that. And actually by having capital available when you need it in a more easy and convenient way, I'm sure is going to massively help as well with that kind of cash flow and capital needs. And then I think the last point that I thought of when I was reading the article was around like scalability and growth. You know, if these businesses are thinking about what their next steps might be, then having capital so readily available can only help them to scale their operations, pursue different growth opportunities, you know, whether that's opening another store or expanding into a new geography. It could be a range of different things. But I think by having this capital as a service solution, there are very tangible benefits that can probably be realized almost immediately for these SMBs.
To build on that point, Pipe plays in a space where there are relatively very few protections for customers relative to traditional lending, just because buying a percentage of future recurring revenue is not technically considered a loan. It's led to this industry of revenue-based financing, invoice factoring, merchant cash advances, which fall under mostly the scope of credit laws. So these alternatives are a lot faster, they're less constrained in the industries that they tend to serve, but the way that they're structured, as we're seeing now, leads to fees that could potentially be pretty predatory compared to actual loans. So just last month, the state of New York sued Yellowstone Capital for structuring merchant cash advances in a way that effectively brought the cost of capital up to over 800% for some of their customers. And so there's a lot of opaqueness in this space. And the value prop of companies like Pipe is to offer fast financing with much more transparent rates. And I think this allows a whole new level of flexibility for businesses. I think what's interesting for Pipe specifically is that originally they started out as a financing company for recurring revenue businesses. So high growth, like B2B SaaS tech companies, and they've sort of evolved to make financing available to now brick and mortar companies, mom and pop shop that wouldn't otherwise have access to this kind of funding. And I think embedding this into the payment flow just makes it that much easier for those kinds of companies to access this kind of product.
Joanne, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, just imagine the stress that this takes out, because, there's so much that's lumpy in terms of receivables waiting for payments to come in, and just knowing that you could have a very short-term, low-cost safety net that just helps you through the, if customers, just a couple of days late or something, just being able to smooth out those lumps and bumps, it takes huge stress out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to Nadine's point, when we've spoken to SMBs in the US and other countries, I think there is kind of that big split between the capital that you need, as you say, for the lumps and the bumps, the small amounts that just help you to ride out the unexpected costs or the late pays, etc., versus the capital that you need to invest, to grow, to make big strategic decisions about where you're focusing your efforts as a business. So I think there's obviously a huge opportunity for Pipe in that kind of lumps and bumps space. I'd be intrigued to see kind of how far up the kind of loan value chain they're looking to go. I mean, they've talked about distributing $1 billion in funding to US SMBs. So we're not talking about pocket money here. But yeah, really interesting to see where they take it, and to kind of see how, as you say, offering this capital in the context of different platforms enables them to reach and serve different customers. So we shall wait and see. Okay, now for a quick look at some more click-worthy news this week. Nadine, what have you got for us?
Adyen and UNICEF launch partnership to accelerate progress for children worldwide. The article is from FF News, and the key points are: the new partnership will leverage Adyen's payments technology to help UNICEF scale up their fundraising. Adyen's giving product enables businesses to easily integrate donations into their payment flows so merchants can activate donations at checkout. Adyen will match donations made via giving for the first 3 months of a new campaign. Ethan Tandowski, Chief Financial Officer at Adyen, says, "Innovation, speed, and scale are 3 core principles that we live by at Adyen. By enabling our merchants and their consumers to seamlessly support UNICEF's mission, we have a unique opportunity to drive significant progress for children worldwide." I think this is a fantastic example of fintech for good, and I think that a solution like this will really inspire businesses and consumers to infuse their transactions with purpose. And not only that, but then offering obviously a really effective way to generate funds and accelerate progress for children all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also got this story from Finextra, and that is Canada to get open banking legislation this year. The Canadian government has promised open banking legislation will be in place by the end of 2024. The new framework will be overseen by the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, the FCAC, just to confuse it versus the FCA in the UK. The legislation will involve 6 core framework elements: governance, scope, accreditation, common rules, national security, and technical standards. The government has been pressured into acting fast on open banking after 2 separate industry groups launched campaigns for it last year. Well, I feel, we've said it. Under pressure to act fast, but I feel like we've been talking about open banking in Canada for a long time. We've recorded various news insight shows in particular around the kind of Canadian fintech scene, which is super interesting. Some really kind of cool dynamics to it, or challenging dynamics to it. But yeah, we were talking sort of about the potential impact of open banking in sort of 2022. So I think really hoping that this does mean that we are going to see open banking come into force in Canada and kind of be used to create new experiences that will be more intuitive for customers and businesses working with Canadian fintechs or Canadian banks. So yeah, fingers crossed. And we can chat about open banking in Canada and PSD3 for many, many more episodes. It's very, very exciting. Okay, now it's time for the and finally section of the show, a look at something a little bit more offbeat from the world of finance. Quite an unusual story this week. We've taken it from The Guardian, but I've seen it in a few places. A woman in Brazil has been arrested after trying to defraud her dead uncle and take out a loan. It does actually get stranger, I don't know if you can believe that, but Erica de Souza Vieira and her uncle, who was in a wheelchair, visited the branch to sign off on the $3,250 loan. However, distress clerks raised concern as the 68-year-old looked rather unwell, to say the least. It later emerged that the man had been dead for hours, and the woman was arrested and charged for violating a corpse and attempted theft through fraud. Whew, nice cheerful one to end on. Nadine, have you ever contemplated taking a corpse into a bank to get access to funds?
I can't say I have. I've contemplated taking my dad against his will. Is probably the closest I've come from this. But honestly, this when I read the article, it just raised so many logistical questions. If he was dead before going to the branch, how did she transport him by herself? I mean, she looked like quite a physically small lady. So were there accomplices? I mean, this is now my detective brain going on.
No, same. Also, how do you react in that situation? They say, oh, this person's dead. Do you just kind of feign surprise with everyone else? Oh, I guess he is very stiff.
Oh, I didn't notice that he wasn't breathing. How strange. Yeah, bizarre. But then on the other side, I mean, the kind of jokes and shock aside, it also kind of made me think, well, I mean, this woman must have been very desperate if she was kind of willing to go through this with her dead uncle for the sake of a $3,250 loan. So at the same time, just wanting to understand her circumstances in more detail and what drove her to doing something like this.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just for full legal protection for ourselves, I think I understand that she is apparently claiming that he was alive when she took him into the bank, and he died whilst he was in the bank. So she hasn't been convicted, has just been charged. So all those caveats apply. But yeah, no, I agree. I was thinking through, I get stressed enough trying to identify on the London Underground whether somebody is pregnant and I should offer them their seat, let alone whether you try and identify, are you dead? How would you ask somebody, you look really unwell. You look awful. Are you alive? I just can't really imagine how that conversation would go down. Sophie, have you got any further pearls of insight on this one? What can we take from this as an industry? Very serious.
No, I mean, to your point, I think I have anxiety about even identifying myself when I'm opening a new account, knowing all of the parameters that are in place that go into KYC. Whenever I'm applying for a new account, I'm I swear that I'm this person. Here's my ID. Please believe me. And so I can't imagine the level of confidence it would take to vouch the same for a corpse, allegedly.
It is crazy, the thought process we go through, just building on Sophie's point. I've had that a couple of times recently where you're in a situation like that, you've applied for a new account, you've submitted the documents, you know that you are who you are, but there's always still that moment where you're like, oh, but what if I'm not? What if they don't believe me? Like, and you kind of doubt yourself in that situation. The something that happened to me recently, although perhaps I should be flattered about it, is every time I go to Sainsbury's and I try to buy a bottle of wine, I get asked for my ID, and I am always quite shocked by it. And the last time I was particularly shocked, and I gave the wrong age. I gave an underage age out of panic. I was like, oh, I'm 17. And then I was like, no, I'm absolutely not 17. And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry. I had a big birthday milestone recently. I turned 30 last year, and I was like, I'm sorry. I just I'm going through a bit of a change and haven't accepted yet that I'm 30. And they're like, oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you just panic.
I've been asked to ask you guys what the cheekiest thing is that you've ever tried to get away with. Sophie, what's the cheekiest thing you've ever tried to get away with? Obviously, please don't incriminate yourself in any shape or form.
I can't think of anything particularly cheeky I've done. I'm such a straight and narrow person. I genuinely, like, it bothers me to lie, and so I guess I'll look to you guys for better stories.
I quite often try to kind of like leverage social stereotypes, or so, I do have blondish hair, so when it suits me, I do quite like to just play up to it and occasionally pretend that I don't know what I'm doing if I just can't be bothered to do something, or I'm a bit lost or whatever like it. So and I did when I was
recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did have great success when I was a bit, there's a sort of period in the UK when like you get like a student card, and then you can get sort of discounted tickets for cinemas and things like that. And I went with some friends to the cinema when half of us had student cards, but one of us didn't. And we just agreed, because it was two girls and one guy, the guy didn't have the student card. And so we just agreed that we would pretend when we got to the cinema to shout at this guy and tell him off for forgetting his card. And because the cashier was a fellow young man, he just turned around and went like girls, leave him alone, and let him have the student ticket. So we kind of got the student ticket for it was slightly fraudulent. Do I regret it? No.
Do you still have your student card?
I don't have my student card anymore, very sadly, because similar to Nadine, that part of my life is well behind me now. Nadine, what cheeky things have you done?
Oh, I was racking my brain. I'm sure there are some things, but my story was actually quite similar to yours. So I grew up in Cape Town, and I did my undergrad at the University of Cape Town, and the student cards they issued there didn't have a date on them. So for a very long time after I lived in London, I would use my undated South African student card to claim to still be a student to get the nice discounts, etc. The only reason it stopped is because I actually lost that student card. Otherwise, who knows, maybe I would still be cheekily trying to get student rates in this day and age.
Joanne, what's the cheekiest thing you've ever done?
Do you know, I'm struggling to think. I wonder whether I've put a whole pile of cheeky things to the back of my memory and I'm pretending they never existed. Definitely did the student card thing as well, particularly in terms of creating a student card for my brother, who was 2 years younger. That was definitely something that kept our relationship strong in those teenage years. But aside, it makes me think of the Theresa May running through the fields of wheat. I'm struggling to think of something right now, but I know for sure that there will be stuff. I've just got it buried dark.
Deeply repressed. Well, on that note, that brings us to the end of today's show. Thank you so much to all of our guests for joining us today. Where can people find out a bit more about you, Sophie?
I'm on Twitter at It's Sophie Vo, also LinkedIn. So let's connect.
Awesome. Joanne, what about you?
LinkedIn, Joanne Dewar, and the new Project Nemo website, projectnemo.co.uk, and Project Nemo's got a LinkedIn page as well.
Awesome news. And Nadine, what about you?
Yeah, also LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. It's Nadine Timmer Bodenstein.
Brilliant. And as for me, you can find me on LinkedIn also, Kate Moody, or drop me an email, kate@learnfirst.com. Thank you very much for listening. If you like what you've heard, please follow our podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us to make the show better and helps others to find us as well. As always, if you want to join the conversation, find us on social media, just search for 11FS or Fintech Insider, or email podcasts@11FS.com. Thanks very much. Goodbye.